This week we are joined by Dr Luciano Simões to explore cross-training as a modern vocal pedagogy through a Latin American lens, unpacking how singers can develop flexibility, resilience, and stylistic authenticity across different genres. Drawing on the rich hybridity of Latin American music, Luciano shares how cross-training equips singers to navigate diverse vocal demands with both technical freedom and cultural awareness. It's a conversation that challenges the idea of fixed vocal identities and invites singers and teachers like you and I to embrace versatility, curiosity, and the vibrancy of diverse global vocal styles. Welcoming Dr. Luciano Simões. Luciano, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, thank you. And thank you so much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here and really enjoying it. So, yeah, it's great.
Thanks for being here. And you're a bit of a globetrotter. You have spent a lot of time in different parts of the world. So do you have a favorite?
Oh, I don't know, but at this point, I think Germany needs to be my favorite because I live here. So it's a great country to live and a lot of opportunities for musicians also. It's very dynamic in terms of how you move around, trying to get to know people, making new contacts. And for me, being from Brazil, there's so much interest here in Brazilian music. So that's another thing that's very interesting for me here. But yeah, it's for certain very different from other countries that I have lived in, the US, Canada, Brazil, and Portugal. So this is the fifth country that I live in. And it's definitely a different experience, a totally different culture and all that.
Can you tell us a little bit about your background and how you were first introduced to Latin American music?
Coming from Brazil, Brazilian music is the music that we grow up with. So it was very good for me to have that richness in culture and music when I was growing up. Brazilian music, it's just so rich and varied. There are so many different genres and vocal styles to know. So I think that the fact that we already have such richness in culture there in Brazil is already something that when you're interested in music and you're trying to become a professional musician, it's something that makes you already move forward in terms of a little bit more of varied interests. For example, you can have Brazilian popular music, rock, jazz, music from the countryside of Brazil that we call sertanejo, classical Brazilian music. So there's so much that you can procure and know more when you're becoming a musician there. So for me, it was really, really great that so much music around me when I was growing up. And of course, I was really interested in rock music from Great Britain, from the US, listening to The Who and Led Zeppelin and all that. And then I became very interested in Brazilian rock at the time. In the 1980s, we had a lot of rock in Brazil. So I started my life as a musician singing in rock bands in Brazil and singing Brazilian music in bars and events and all that. But at the time, I never thought that I was going to become a professional musician. It's just something that you do that's fun, For some time, I was in a different career. I was becoming a pharmacist. Actually, yeah, it's very interesting how that happened because I was in University of São Paulo, and I would sing in parties and sing in events there with my rock band and all that. At the same time, I was studying to become a pharmacist. But then I graduated and I don't like this. I like to sing, you know. So I graduated in pharmacy, and the following year I started studying voice in a different university, music and specializing in voice. I don't know if you went through that, the thing that people tell you that, okay, music is really, really fun, but it's not really a profession, a real serious profession and all that. So I had to go through the whole process of understanding how to become a professional musician. The interesting thing is that even though I grew up with a lot of Brazilian music, Latin American music as a whole, the Hispanic countries, music coming from those countries, is we don't hear that much in Brazil, and that's something that is very interesting for us to discuss because of the language and the culture, because we are the only speaking country in Latin America, and we are a huge country, to more than 200 million people. It's a little bit self-contained, so there's not so much conversation with other countries in Latin America in terms of exchanging cultural experiences and exchanging music. So there is much more now than it used to be. But at the time that I was growing up and studying music, we didn't know much about Hispanic music, music from Spanish-speaking countries.
When you mention that it's Brazilian jazz and Brazilian pop and Brazilian rock, pardon my ignorance, but how would we know that we were listening to Brazilian jazz versus another type of jazz?
Oh yeah, this is very interesting. I love jazz so much that sometimes it's really hard even for me to find a clear border between Brazilian jazz and American jazz, for example. The thing is that bossa nova got to the US in the 1960s and became very popular there. And nowadays it's considered a type of jazz in the US. So you have ballads and slow swing and fast swing and bossa nova. It's just one of the types of jazz that they have. So for us, it's not like that. It's bossa nova is Brazilian music. So when you're singing and performing jazz, you need to remember that actually bossa nova jazz is how Americans view bossa nova, but it's not really the Brazilian music that we know. So there is this transition between Brazilian popular music and bossa nova, which is part of Brazilian popular music, to what we consider as jazz in general. So when you're singing, you need to know that is a little bit different, the approach that you have when you're singing jazz and when you're singing Brazilian music. But it's very similar. It's not that it's that different. In American jazz, you have a lot of, for example, a lot of improv. Improvisation is just something that you do there. And in Brazilian popular music, not so much. And you need to know that, okay, if I start here to do a little bit of elements that I have in American jazz, for example, improv and using of scat, for example, then I'm crossing that bridge between Brazilian music and jazz, and it's more like this Brazilian jazz that we have all over the world.
So you created a cross-training voice program based on Latin American vocal styles. What sort of vocal characteristics define Latin American as a style, and what makes it distinct in a way that we would know, we're listening to Latin American music?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. I started teaching as a classical voice teacher. So my approach was very traditional, with the traditional way of teaching and all that. But more and more, I became interested in, okay, how can I create a vocal pedagogy that is more universal? It's not only for classical voice. And with my experience in popular music, I had so much experience in popular music before I started not only teaching but singing classical music. I thought, okay, it cannot be that separate. It was a time, 1990s and early 2000s, that the universes between popular music and classical were still very, very separated. And I started to think that, okay, maybe we could think about something that could be more universal. And I naturally started thinking about cross training, not even knowing that was something called cross training and crossover music. And then when I got in touch with this vocal pedagogy from Gina Lovetri and so many others, I thought, okay, this is really, really interesting. This is exactly what I need for my work. And I started 15 years ago teaching. I was teaching at the University of Campinas at the time, and I started teaching also musical theater for classical voice students. They were auditioning for musical theater and they didn't know how they should audition for musical theater since they are classically trained. And I didn't know also, so I had to look, oh, how can I do that? And more and more I became interested in, okay, how can I teach two genres or two vocal styles at the same time? And is that good? There's so many people who tell you that, okay, you can do that. This is not good for the voice. This is not healthy. I looked into it for many years researching that. And more I became convinced that, okay, this is actually good for the voice. And I became more and more specialized in musical theater and classical cross training. Okay, that was all good and all that. But 2013, I was accepted in the vocal program at the Latin American Integration University in Brazil. It was a new university with a new music program. And this university was the first in Brazil that was bilingual, so officially Portuguese and Spanish. The goal of this university is really, really interesting, is to really integrate the cultures between Brazil and Hispanic America. And because of that, the music program was already naturally inclined to offer music from Brazil and from all over Latin America and the Americas in general. I came into this program with that background in cross training between musical theater and classical, and with my background in pop music from my beginnings. And I thought, okay, this is such a great opportunity for me to apply in an official university program these ideas I have of how can we train singers in a voice program, in a 4-year voice program, which is something that in public universities in Brazil was the first time. And in Latin America is maybe two or three universities at the most that do that. So this was a really a great opportunity for me. But as I told you before, I didn't know that much about Latin American music, but from Spanish-speaking countries. I know a lot about Brazilian music and musical theater and classical, but pop music from Spanish-speaking countries in Latin America, I didn't know that much. And I thought, okay, this is really, it's an amazing challenge. it was such a great opportunity for me to know more music, to know this music from Latin America, from countries like Ecuador and Colombia and Venezuela and Cuba and many more. And the richness of this music is just overwhelming. It's just something that I didn't know. Many of my colleagues in Brazil still don't know. I know that many voice teachers in the world don't know about this richness in vocal music in Latin America.
Can you tell us a little bit about those characteristics? What do you mean by that richness? What would we hear?
First of all, we have these influences. For example, we have the African influence because the African diaspora all over Latin America. So a lot of different rhythms coming from different areas from Africa and different ethnic cultures. So there are a lot of different percussive music and rhythms that influence this popular music in Latin America. Also, you mix that with the vocal music from Spain and Portugal that came to Latin America, and then the waves of immigrants coming from all over Europe. You have music from native cultures also in Latin America. So there is a lot of different elements that come together to make new music. So you have, we were talking about bossa nova, for example. There is a music that is in itself very, very hybrid. So hybridity in Latin America is very common. So every style that you have is hybrid. In bossa nova, for example, you have a little bit of samba that comes from African cultures in Rio and influence the rhythm in bossa nova. You have a little bit of influence from jazz and from classical music because of the harmonies. Tom Jobim was very influenced by harmonies from Debussy, for example. Jazz from Frank Sinatra, Bing Crosby, this whisper voice that people use in bossa nova, very close to the microphone. It's a kind of style that delivers very, very based on the text deliverance and not only the big interpretation. And then you go all the way to ranchera in Mexico that is very passionate and a lot of big voices influenced by opera, by a more classical style, variety of styles that we have that is so amazing. Because when you're teaching, okay, I'm teaching Latin American vocal music, how can I make this connection between bossa nova and tango, which tango is a big, low female voice with a very round and with a lot of passion. And then you have Pastillo Ecuatoriano, for example, with a very romantic song. And then you have this from Colombia, which has this very bright and belted sound. So how can you make up from all those different influences and different types of voices that you have in Latin America? How can you teach Latin American music when the person or the student or the class doesn't know anything about Latin America? How do you start? Okay, I need to start with cross training and start with explaining the diversity. Latin American music is far from being one thing. It's the most diverse music that you can find.
Hi, it's Lynn here, popping by with a free resource. If you're a singer who wants to teach but sometimes feels a little unsure or overwhelmed, I've put together some free resources to help you feel grounded and supported as you take your next steps. Just check the link in the podcast description and you'll get an informed, practical PDF guide to help you get started plus a few follow-up resources to help you feel less of a fraud and more confident in your teaching journey.
How should singers and teachers approach performing or teaching this repertoire if they don't come from a Latin American background themselves?
Yeah, I think that's one of the most important questions that we can think of. Since I'm living here in Germany now, and I'm not anymore in a program that I would only have Latin American students. So this is a very important question that we need to think about. So the first thing that I can think of is okay, we need to explain the basics of cross training. So cross training for me now is my way of life. It's my vocal pedagogy, is how I teach anybody. When I teach classical or musical theater or pop music, I always teach cross training. So I always teach the basics of how you can have a very good breath management, how you can have a breath management that can serve us in any kind of vocal style. How can you make vocal tract adjustments that are very flexible? So the first thing is to teach it. Okay, we need to know that when you sing Latin American music, you're singing a lot of different vocal styles. And you need to have the basics of cross training and the philosophy of cross training to be able to teach, to sing different vocal styles.
And can I just ask, Luciano, in terms of what other elements do you feel are applied to that cross-training foundation so that we can then work on stylistic elements?
Breath management is extremely important for, of course, any kind of singing. But when you're singing bossa nova, for example, it's not that important that you have a great breath management like you have when you're singing classical music. So you need to know how to adapt to each vocal style. What are the demands of that vocal style? So what you need in bossa nova, for example, you need a great articulation, a very, very good text delivery, understanding of what you're saying, but you have to avoid any type of exaggerations. Bossa nova is very plain. You tell the story, sometimes as if the story is not with you, it's somebody else. So it's not like romantic music from Paraguay or Ecuador. It is because of that, you need breath only for that short phrase. And then you need to be able to articulate really well with short breaths. It's very different from when you're singing, for example. In musical theater, you have a little bit more of pressure in your breath management. So that would be because you need to sing belting, and belting needs a little bit more of subglottal pressure. But you need to be able to manage that in a very, very well-trained style. Anyway, you need to know those differences when you're singing different vocal styles. So if you're going to sing sertanejo in Brazil, it's very pressed voice. It's a little bit like country music in the US. So with a very tight and pressed voice. So there's a lot of pressure, and you need to know how to manage that. So you won't lose your voice because you're singing too much, and you don't know how to save your voice for the season. There are a lot of singers who don't know how to do that, and they lose their voice professionally. So when you're teaching, okay, that's what you need to do with your breath. That's what you need to do with your phonation. You need here a little bit more pressed phonation for sertanejo. For bossa nova, you need a little bit more air in your voice. This makes you want to be more flexible. I need to know how to do both if I want to sing both. If I want to sing MPB, which is a genre of Brazilian popular music, it is also something that needs a little bit of management, because sometimes you need to use a little bit more pressure. Sometimes the voice is bigger, like the singer Elis Regina, for example. Sometimes you have a smaller voices, like Caetano Veloso, for example. So you need to know how to do one and the other, and only in a cross-training type of vocal pedagogy you can do that. So the first thing that I would do is present this universe to these new people. It's something that I do a lot in congresses all over Europe and the world. I present my cross-training vocal pedagogy based in Latin American styles. What I do first is that, okay, let's listen those a little bit, just a little bit of those styles, and see how diverse is this music. So you have this kind of voice, belted voice, big voice, singing, for example, joropo from Venezuela. It's a big, a strong voice that you need. Or sometimes when you're singing a more romantic voice, it's a little bit more fluid. For example, if you're going to sing chamamé, you need a more fluid voice. So you have so many different vocal styles, but the principle is the same, is you need a flexible voice. Okay, I need to do different kind of phonations, different kind of breath managements, sometimes more breathy and shorter, sometimes more belted and long. I also need very, very flexible vocal tract. Sometimes a more divergent vocal tract, more belted, sometimes a little bit more convergent vocal tract with a little bit more of a classical influence, sometimes very, very plain with no movement from my larynx or my palate, just speech-like. And the thing is that when you know those basics, then it comes to, okay, let's know a little bit more of the styles itself. Listen and get to know more how people sing those styles, as we would do basically for any vocal style in the world, I think. As I always see here when I present in lectures, this theme is that people tend to think that Latin America is very, very homogeneous, and there is a style of singing Latin American music, and there's not. So we need to have a little bit more of that philosophy of, okay, I'm dealing with an extreme diversity here. Even people from Latin America don't know the diversity.
So when it comes to you working from a cross-training principle or like from a functional basis, can you give us an insight into what a lesson might look like? You're with a singer who wants to be able to be that vocal chameleon and step into lots of different styles. How much of that lesson is spent on finding different adduction levels, or are you going to spend one session on finding clear tone and then a whole other lesson on breathy? Or like, how do you train that?
That's a great question, because when you're dealing with cross-training, you need to know that cross-training is in itself a vocal pedagogy that can be used for anything. I think, and it's my belief, that cross-training is the future in terms of vocal pedagogy. Why is that? Because it's more and more proven, not only for people who want to sing two or more styles, but people who want to sing only one style, that when you train your voice in different ways, you get to sing better in the way that you chose. It is in itself a teaching philosophy that mitigates injury, promotes vocal health, promotes awareness and confidence in your voice, because your voice becomes more reliable, more controlled. I teach classical singers nowadays that, okay, let's sing a little bit something that is very different from what you used to sing. So let's choose a jazz song, for example, and sing and see how that goes. And when they come back to that aria that they're singing, they sing better. So vocal function, habilitation. So you prepare your vocal functions, phonation, resonance, articulation. You prepare separately. You prepare better control of your chest voice, a better control of your head voice separately, and then create a very good mixed voice. But also you can have that separated also for your independence, proprioception, awareness, that you become more aware of what you're doing, not only with your voice, but okay, what am I doing now with my palate, with my larynx, with my body? How is my body aligned in this style? This preparation in cross training, I think it's one of the best things that you can do for any style. And of course, if you try to create vocal pedagogy that can be used in an universe like Latin American music, it needs to be a vocal pedagogy that is flexible. So, can you sing a belted sound? Can you sing a sound with a little bit more air? Can you use fluid phonation now? Can you go from fluid to pressed to breathy phonation? Can you do those three phonations? Okay, that's control. You have independence. You have choices. So when I tell you, okay, bossa nova is like this, or tango is like that, or pastillo is like that, I can adapt my vocal tract to sing those styles. Cross-training will be the same for any universe. The difference is that I teach a universe of music that many people here in Europe, for example, I think most people don't know. So that's really rewarding to me to present that new universe to people.
If I was coming to you, I'm from a pop background, let's say. I like to sing sort of breathily and softly and intimately, maybe from let's say an artist like Lizzie McAlpine or Billie Eilish. But I said, hey, Luciano, I would really love to be able to sing pop with a tango influence. What would I need to work on? What would your assumptions be coming from that particular genre into the style that I would now like to include?
That's a great question, because in my voice teaching philosophy, I deal with a lot of bridges. Okay, let's build bridges. If I'm teaching, or if the student is interested in a particular style, I try to find how can I connect that with something that you know already. It's important for me to be aware of, first of all, of what you're talking about. Okay, what kind of music are you bringing to me? And this is something that I learned in those 10 years that I was at the Latin American Integration University, because I had students from all over Latin America there. And I would get a student, for example, from the Dominican Republic, and I don't know the music from the Dominican Republic. And okay, what I tell the students that I need to learn that music. Bring your music to me, and I want to learn that. I want to listen to that music and to learn more about this music, because I don't know. The moment that I listen to it and I get to know it a little bit better, I can create the bridges between that music and the music that I don't know. I learned a lot of music like that. I learned so much music with my students. The thing about having students from so many different countries and they are bringing their music to class is just amazing. So if I don't know the music, I would, okay, bring your music to me. Let's listen to this music and let's see what are the connections. So between pop music in general, like Billie Eilish, for example, that uses a little bit of fry, a little bit of belting, a little bit of breathy sounds, also a little bit of riffs, and all that those things that pop style has so much. I would make the connections to, for example, to Brazilian MPB, which is a very popular kind of a ballad-based music with a lot of pop sounds in it. There are singers in Argentina, for example, singing tango, who use a more pop style to sing tango. So nowadays, because of sounds that we have crossing our lives, it's so much easier to find singers in the big centers like Buenos Aires and São Paulo, Asunción, or Bogota, or wherever. You find singers who are already influenced by American music or British music or music from all over. And they are already making a little bit of hybrid sounds, hybrid voice with that music. If you tell me, okay, I want to sing tango, I like to sing pop, that's my voice. I know singers who in Argentina sing tango with a pop sound already. For you to do that is actually not anymore something new because there are professional singers doing that, but it's because it's a normal process of hybridity that you get the music that you know, these pop sounds that are all over everybody's lives, and you put together with the music that you know. So there's so much pop-ish music happening in Latin America, in big cities, that the bridges that we can build nowadays are actually not that hard. The two words that I like the most when I teach Latin American music and now when I teach voice is cross-training and hybridity. Because, hybridity is just what we breathe. Everything that you sing in pop music is hybrid. Simon Thirst said once that pop music is naturally hybrid. So we are already dealing with hybrid music.
I'm just pressing the pause button on the podcast for a very brief moment to invite you to book your free BAST call. If you've been thinking about joining the BAST community through one of our courses, but you just don't know which option is the best for you, then why not book your free Zoom chat with our very own Kimberly George, who has all the answers. Head over to basttraining.com/book-a-call/ and click that big blue button. That's basttraining.com/book-a-call/. Now, where were we? In your experience so far, have there been any sort of technical conflicts between styles, such as singing classical versus musical theatre versus types of belting? And how have you been able to sort of crack through that challenge?
Yeah, I think that we have very common for us teachers to have those kind of challenges. It's something very interesting when I get to deal with those kinds of challenges, because this is when I like the most about being a teacher, is that, okay, challenge, how can I solve this problem? And most of the times is the singers are not used to change the way that they sing. 100% of my students are not beginners. So they are in different levels of expertise and sometimes they are emerging professionals, sometimes they are full professionals. Many times I face this kind of challenge when the singer cannot change the way that they sing. And okay, this is how I sing. This is how I learned, and this is the only healthy way that I can produce sound and all that. My goal when I face that is it's okay. How can we release tension? Because if you cannot change your voice, you cannot change the way that you sing, it's because you're fixed. Not only your mindset is fixed, but your body is also fixed. So I will work a lot in terms of releasing tension, of trying to release the body, trying to release the muscles that are overly tensioned, and try to create an environment where the student feels free to produce any kind of sound. Because most of the times, and I got that a lot from the classical universe, that fear of being wrong. Okay, always I need to produce a very beautiful sound. It needs to be that perfect, and I cannot change or try new things because then it could be, something else, something ugly. And what I tell my students, I want you to sing ugly. I want you to create a different sound because the only concern that we have now is that you don't change. Unless you manage to change your sound, there's no crossover. There's nothing I can do because it's going to be stuck in that. So there's a lot of, training in proprioception, training in body alignment. I do a lot of Alexander technique with my students and Feldenkrais also. And try them to be more aware of their body, more aware of the tensions that they have, more aware of what they are doing. And then, okay, let's try to make different sounds. I don't care about beauty. I only care about different. And then you can start building from that.
I think sometimes we get stuck in a rut as singers of, well, that thing is chest voice and that thing is belt. We tend to forget that there are nuances to all of those things and that chest voice isn't just one thing, it's got a whole host of things it could be. There's just elements to it that we would perceive as being chest. And there's different types of belt. Are you doing a standard Broadway belt, or are you doing a contemporary musical theatre belt, or are you belting like Ariana Grande? They're all belt. It's not just one thing. But in order to find those nuances in qualities, you have to be able to have a flexible and responsive instrument to do that with.
Exactly. That's exactly the point. I teach belting for musical theater singers. When I'm teaching pop music, for example, I try not to use the term belting. I use more like belted sounds or belted like sounds than really belting, because sometimes it brings a little bit of, okay, this is Broadway belt and it needs to be that way, that fixed way. It's the same thing about saying, okay, I need a classical voice. Classically light voice, I like more convergent sound, for example, than talking about real classical voice, because then you already, if you're a pop singer, is like classical, he's going to teach me classical. It's like tension already. The only thing for me teaching cross training in a new voice style for that person is to make those connections. Okay, here, use more of a belted sound, a little bit more of a push, but not too much. You don't want to sing it to push too hard or to make anything that will create some kind of being stuck in that position. Flexibility and resilience are two things that I work a lot with my students. For me, it's so good, rewarding that I got to this voice pedagogy in parallel ways, like applying cross training at the same time that I saw, okay, I have all of these styles here that I can apply cross training right away to my students in my lessons. So that was something that I learned in those 10 years at the Latin American Integration University that I didn't learn 15 years teaching classical voice before. As you well know, musical theater nowadays is pure cross training. I mean, you need to be prepared to sing so much, so many different styles. You're going to audition for Golden Age today and for pop rock tomorrow and everything in between, contemporary belt and classical belt. There's so much that is being asked from the professional musical theater singer. I have students, singers who are professional musical theater performers, and they are sometimes overwhelmed over the so many different styles they need to prepare for one audition after the other. There's so much preparation involved nowadays just to be auditioning that I don't see any other way of teaching musical theater using cross training.
I remember speaking to Juliet Russell at the beginning of the year, and in the start of that conversation, we were talking about, allowing artists in any genre, but we were talking specifically about the contemporary world, to be able to grow with their lives, looking at people like Sabrina Carpenter. I think Harry Styles is a good example now of how they grow up from being young in the industry to then becoming adults and having their own experiences, and how that might influence their music to change. And if you want to grow as an artist in that way too, having cross-genre training and that functional training means you have access to allow your voice to grow with you in a way that can respond to those things more easily than being, as you say, fixed.
Yeah, exactly. And it's this mindset, the growth mindset, as opposed to the fixed mindset. The first thing that you have to change is the mindset. And so how you view, how you sing, or what you need to be a professional singer. Do you need to be, well, okay, my larynx needs to be like this, and my palate like that, and I need to do this, and everything needs to be stuck. Then you go nowhere, not even in your own profession, because you cannot even sing classical like that. You cannot sing anything like that. You really need to have flexible vocal tract, a flexible idea of how your body can move and adapt to different styles. So as long as you have that, I can play for you a new vocal style, whatever, and okay, I can make a bridge with a different vocal style that I know, and we can start from there and make little changes and little adaptations after that, because we are not only talking about vocal tract when we talk about a different style. We're talking about what is the style really, musically speaking. How you do you understand the rhythm? Do you understand the delivery of the text? Do you understand how you can make the beginning of the phrases, the release of the phrases? How is that a long note? Is a short note? What do you need to do in that new vocal style? So it's always a matter of knowledge of that style in particular, with a previous knowledge of cross training that you can apply anywhere. But it's not only for multi-style singers. I think it's for everybody nowadays. It's just modern voice pedagogy.
And where can people find out about you and follow your work and learn a bit more about all these Latin American styles and how they can cross over?
The fastest way to find me is through Instagram. It's at Luciano Simões _ DMA. There you can find my link tree also with all the links that I think are important to know a little bit more about my work. And I'm available if you want to talk more about Latin American styles. It was so great to know you and be part of this podcast. We need so much, podcasts like yours. I know the work, or I can only imagine the work that is in the production of a podcast like yours. I've always wanted to do a podcast, and I was with my friend talking about it, and we're like, no, this is just too much. And I really envy how you can do it. So
Oh, well, it's with the help from people like you coming on and having these conversations. So thank you so much, Mr. Dr. Luciano Simões.
thank you so much.